Welcome back, everyone, to the Practical Enthusiast Garage, where we're continuing mechanical maintenance on my 1989 BMW 325i E30. Now, in the last video, we did a lot of mechanical repairs. We put the transmission back in the car, we put the drive shaft back in, we put a new exhaust system in. Now, today, we're going to be dealing with the engine itself. We're going to replace the timing belt, the water pump, some oil seals, and various other gaskets. We're also going to do a valve adjustment and a few other things that will get this engine running smooth once again. But before we get started, let's take a look at the parts we have. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over all these parts because there's a ton of them, and I've already made a video way back when I first got these parts delivered. But the big hitters in this box of wonder are the new timing belt. We've got a bunch of new accessory belts. We've got a new intake elbow. We've got a new water pump. We've got a new timing belt tensioner, a new oil filter, a new fan clutch, a new power steering pump reservoir, a new valve cover gasket. And then over here, we've got, of course, got new BMW coolant and a new fan shroud because the one in the car right now is cracked. Once all these are in the car, my pile of parts sitting over in the corner of the garage will significantly be decreased. So this job from start to finish is going to take a bit of time. First thing to do is tear everything out of the engine bay. Let's get going. pause for an update. I finally got everything out of the engine bay, and things went deeper than I thought. Let's take a look. So I've successfully gotten everything removed from the front side of the engine, and getting to the timing belt wasn't really all that difficult, but I found out along the way that the timing belt kit that I ordered didn't come with all the parts that were necessary to do a thorough job of resealing the front side of this engine. First of all, the timing belt kit only came with a crankshaft seal and a camshaft seal, but as I got in there I realized there's another front seal that needs to be replaced. That is the oil pump lay shaft right here, needs a new seal as well, and the timing cover that both those seals mount to needs to be removed and a new gasket put on that. Timing belt kit didn't come with that either. However, something that the kit did come with was a new thermostat housing gasket that mounts to the cylinder head right here. Now, removing that thermostat housing opened up a whole new can of worms. The housing itself is only held in with 2 nuts on these studs protruding from the cylinder head, but you can't actually pull that housing off of those studs until you remove the fuel rail. So I had to remove the fuel rail. Of course, that in itself was a problem. Let's take a look why. So I found out there are 2 different fuel injector connectors going on with fuel rails on these E30s. And I have the older style electrical connector. And these use these C-looking type wire clips. And there's really no way to get these off of there unless you mutilate the connector a slight bit, which is what I had to do. So if you look in here, you can see right here's the connector, and here's the channel that this clip rides in. I had to take an X-Acto knife and cut this little bracket right here. And from there I used a hook pick and slid it under there and was able to get the edge of this clip and kind of yank it out of there. And that did work, but it took me a while to kind of figure that out. Now the newer style of these connectors are just a push style clip. You just push it in and then pull up on the connector and you're done. But this just added a whole nother level of complexity that I had to figure out on my own. So if anyone's doing this, there's your tip. Coming over here to the fuel rail, one of the injectors I've taken out, and you can see how filthy that thing is. And all of these are just, I don't even know how the car ran. There's not even a hole for fuel to come out. Now, granted, this may have been caused by me trying to remove this because there was so much grease and dirt built up around the intake manifold that it's possible that I clogged these up as I was removing them. Either way, I'm gonna have to take these out and clean them up. You can see the O-rings on the end of the injector. There's one O-ring that goes into the intake manifold itself, and then there's another one that seals up the injector to the fuel rail. You just pull these clips off, and then you just pop the injector out of the fuel rail, and there's the O-ring. So again, I had to get a new set of these. Luckily, I was able to find a set of these O-rings locally, because otherwise I'd be delayed another week and a half having to order these online and get them shipped to my house. So again, talk about a rabbit hole of an operation. What started off as something as simple sounding as replacing the timing belt has turned into a complete fuel system refresh. Can't say that it's a bad thing that I'm doing it, but it was certainly something I was not expecting to have to do. So as I was pulling all these parts out of the engine bay, I found out that I needed to buy a lot of new parts. More so than I had originally started off with. That's because as you start removing things, stuff that's really old just tends to break. Let's go check out the extra parts that I ended up having to buy. So starting off here, these are the new fuel injector O-rings. Again, I was able to buy these locally. It was only about $5, so that's a good deal. Next in this huge box right here are all new coolant hoses for the car. When I was pulling these hoses off, some of them were in good shape, but some of them were completely rotten on the inside. I can't believe how many coolant lines are running throughout this car, but there's 4 just alone on the front side of the engine. Then you've got 2 throttle body hoses, and then there was also a vent hose that goes from the valve cover to the throttle body. Had to get that too because there was some custom operation going on under there, and I just had to get rid of that. Again, a lot of specially formed hoses that you just cannot do with a standard hose you get at your auto parts store. You gotta really just get one specific for the car. They weren't really that expensive. I think total it was under $70 for all these hoses, so it's definitely worth just spending the money and getting it done. Let's go check out the other box. Okay, so in this box is basically all the parts that need to be done to thoroughly do a timing belt service on this car, along with gasket replacement at the front side of the engine. For some reason, the timing belt kit that I ordered didn't come with all these parts. I've got a couple new seals in here. The lay shaft seal is the same seal that the camshaft seal uses. So I just got those 2. And then I got a new lower timing cover gasket. Again, this was not included in the timing belt kit. I got a new crankshaft bolt. Honestly, these are a one-time use type bolt. They're stretch bolts. This is a pretty heavy duty bolt that really should be replaced if you're ever pulling that crankshaft sprocket off. Also, there's a washer that goes onto this bolt as well. Figured I'd replace that with new. And then I've got a new O-ring for the camshaft seal housing. So on this cylinder head, the camshaft seal mounts on a housing that's separate than the cylinder head itself. Again, something I can't believe wasn't included in the timing belt kit, since, I mean, this is something that should be replaced when you're going through and doing all this work. And lastly, in this box is a set of new ignition hardware. As I was pulling off the old ignition wires, one of the ignition wire caps just broke in half. I wasn't being rough with it, it was just old and it came apart. So I had to go out and buy completely new ones. This is a new ignition cap. So the old one was really worn out. Here's a new ignition rotor. Again, the one that was in there was completely gone. I'm pretty sure the ignition hardware on this car was original. So you can imagine after 250,000+ miles, it's time for some new parts. And then of course, new spark plug wires in here. Now there's really no cheap way of going about replacing these. These are Bremmy, which are OEM equivalents. You know, total for this complete ignition setup, we're looking at about $150. And that really is the cheapest option. You know, I think it'll be worthwhile in the end. Now, since obviously I had to wait a while to get all these new parts delivered, I went ahead and cleaned up all the old parts that I pulled off of the engine. Things like the timing cover, which was just completely covered in grease, is now clean and ready to accept new seals. I also took the liberty to paint up some pieces like this coolant crossover pipe, just because things were looking pretty tatty, and you know what? I was waiting on parts. I might as well make things look a little bit better than when I pulled them out. So what have I learned from doing the timing belt so far? It's that I should have done a little bit more research before I started in. You can't simply trust what a part vendor says is all that's necessary to do a particular job. You really have to do your own groundwork to figure out, you know what? These are the gaskets, these are the seals that I'm going to need to completely do this job. What that means is you're going to have to look up a parts diagram of the whole front side of the engine, you know, do form searches and see what interferes with what. If you're going to take this piece off, what else do you have to take off in front of it? These are basically growing pains when doing work on an unfamiliar vehicle. Again, this is my first time I've ever worked on one of these E30s, and it's just the learning you got to do. I will say I'm a little bit disappointed in the part vendor that I went with. I won't mention a name, but their complete timing belt kit could have been complete for an additional $25 to include those extra gaskets, those O-rings, and those extra seals. I mean, there's just really no reason not to include that. They really mislead you because they include the gasket to the thermostat housing, but then don't tell you you need to remove the fuel rail to even get it off. It really should come with all the O-rings for the fuel injectors as well. Anyway, I hope you guys can learn from my experience now. Hopefully I've been able to explain a little bit better than anywhere else has what parts you actually need to get when doing a timing belt thoroughly on this car. Now, I know a lot of owners will just go in and strictly change the timing belt and the tensioner, pulley, and then put everything back together. Now, this car I don't think has ever been touched. I mean, obviously it's had the timing belt changed before, but things like gaskets and seals, I don't think they've ever been replaced. So most likely there are a lot of other E30s running around out there that need to have basically the whole front side of the engine resealed, and this is what you need to do to even attempt to do that. It's definitely time intensive because while you're in there you have to clean up everything or else it won't go back together very well. I know that was a long monologue. I know a lot of you probably already know all this, but again, for someone new, it's something you just gotta learn, and hopefully this saves some people some time in the future. Anyway, I'm gonna get started on cleaning up those fuel injectors, get them back in the fuel rail, and get them back in the car. Let's get to it. Alright, so I've got the fuel rail reinstalled and cleaned up fuel injectors all in there. Got the thermostat housing mounted back up to the cylinder head and a new thermostat put in. Now we're going to focus on putting new oil seals in the front side of the engine. That means the camshaft oil seal, crankshaft oil seal, and the intermediary shaft, which is where the oil pump comes out the front of the timing cover. And then after that, we'll put in the new water pump, put in the sprockets, we'll put in the timing belt, and hopefully everything goes back together as hoped. Here we go.
Next level. Next level.
Okay, so that's everything reassembled inside of the engine bay. The oil's fresh and the coolant's topped up as well as it can be without the engine running to bleed it fully. So I guess now it's time to see what we've all been waiting for. Will it start? Let's give it a try. Well, that didn't go as smoothly as I was hoping. The engine had a bit of a stumble there on idle, but it kind of smoothed out. The RPM would drop as I blipped the throttle, and then as I closed the throttle, the RPM would drop again. And then it would come back and find idle. So I'll admit, I've already dug around in the engine bay to try and diagnose what's going on here. And I found the issue. Luckily, it's nothing too bad. It's actually down to one of the new parts I put in. So some of you astute viewers may have already noticed what is wrong. So if you think you know what's wrong, go ahead and leave it in a comment below, and I'll leave a heart next to your comment to let you know you're on the right track. Now also, there was sort of Mount Vesuvius going on over there with all the smoke coming off the exhaust headers. That's nothing to be worried about. That's just engine degreaser burning off. So that's gonna happen for a little while until this engine gets all the way up to temperature. So in the next video, we'll dive into the issues that are still going on inside this engine bay, and we'll get this engine running a lot smoother than it is right now. Again, it's nothing major, but they are some details that I overlooked when putting it back together. We'll also finish up the rest of the mechanical repairs that remain on this car. So thanks guys for hanging in there for this video. I know it was a long one, but there was so much information to go over. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you again soon.